In Elden Ring, upon beating Queen Renala, you are given the chance to be reborn. This is your ticket to changing your stats and basically creating a new character from this point in the game. Although changing your character is very useful, there is one part that will remain the same. This video is about the themes of reinvention within the Dark Souls franchise, and of course, those themes carrying into Elden Ring. And if you're new here, this is all over with Clover, where we take your favorite nerdy franchises, stories, anime, video games, and we try to get real-life lessons out of them that we can use in the real world. If that sounds like fun to you, make sure to check out some of my other videos and hit that subscribe button. In Dark Souls, there are 3 factors that deal with rebirth in terms of the plot that I wanted to talk about. Firstly, there is the overarching narrative between the 3 games of a rotting kingdom and a dying flame, which of course we have to decide if we want to continue or end. Then there is our playable character, who is stuck in a cycle of death after death after death, either until his mission is complete or he completely hollows, losing his mind. Finally, there is the call to action of our main character, specifically looking at Dark Souls 3 because I think it's the best example. Our Ashen One is disturbed from his grave, brought back to deal with the issues plaguing the land. This time, it's the bosses also being waken up because the flame is dying and we gotta do something about it. All over this story, there are connections to themes of rebirth and cycles, and trust me, this is gonna come full circle back to you in a little bit. I would be remiss to talk about Dark Souls without mentioning its gameplay, specifically how each game feels different, which is extremely crazy for Dark Souls because of how well known it is specifically for its gameplay. While I do have to admit it is normal for a game franchise to change its gameplay as it evolves and develops, one thing about Dark Souls that I really enjoy, though, is the fact that it keeps its same principles so strongly, yet every single game feels different. And I'm going to go into that right now. Side note, weirdly enough, I would say that Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring, out of all of the games, feel the most similar, which is interesting because Elden Ring and Dark Souls are 2 different universes, franchises, I guess you'd want to call it, but Elden Ring is very clearly the spiritual successor of the Dark Souls franchise. Despite being different universes, those 2 games feel the most similar, I think because Elden Ring just adds on top of what Dark Souls 3 does really well, where Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3 seem to have different combat mechanics within them that we're going to discuss. Very basically breaking down the combat of each game, Dark Souls 1 feels methodical, a little sluggish, and you have to be very well thought out with your combat. Dark Souls 2 is very similar to Dark Souls 1, except for they change the movement, specifically with the agility stat, that makes it feel completely different to very negative responses for most people, I'd say. I still like Dark Souls 2, but that's just my opinion. And then Dark Souls 3 is a complete evolution of the gameplay of Dark Souls 1 and 2, being much faster paced, more frantic, but you still can be very well thought out. The principles are the same, like I said earlier. And then finally, if we look at Elden Ring, it's like Dark Souls 3, but it just puts a lot more tools in your arsenal. If you want to get specific, let's say the jump button, which completely changes combat and in my opinion is a huge plus to combat. The reason why I bring up all this stuff is because, like I said, for a game franchise that is so infamous for their gameplay, it's so interesting to me that each game, each title in the series feels and plays slightly different while keeping those principles intact, the punishing yet fair principles. So this is a video about Dark Souls and Rebirth, and yet I've brought up Elden Ring quite a bit. Very smart observation. Let's get into that. I started this video by saying that while you can have your character be reborn, change your stats, change your appearance, there is always one characteristic that will stay the same. I was being cheeky, I was talking about you, the player, the way you're going to play the game. The heart of your character is the same because you and your brain and your play style it's linked up in there. A lot of franchises, athletes, people, businesses, everything, get something good going and then don't know when to stop. We've all watched a show that was great for a couple seasons and then just absolutely bombed. It didn't know when to end. Should have ended at season 3, kept going to season 6, and became terrible. CW's Flash, I'm looking at you, bud. What is awesome about the Dark Souls Souls/Elden Ring franchise is that Dark Souls was telling the same story over and over again. It was a literal cycle. Finished what it wanted to say, and then was reborn into Elden Ring, something very, very similar. You can't get rid of the heart, the inside head, the way your brain works. You can't get rid of it. But it changed other things and became something completely different. Through the use of going in this alternative direction, the game was able to stay fresh and be reborn into something new and fun instead of giving us something stale and boring like a Dark Souls 4. It was a show that knew it needed to end at Season 3, but the creators weren't done making stuff, they just needed to make something slightly different. Okay, so in the Dark Souls franchise, each game is able to keep it fresh and exciting by changing up some of the gameplay while keeping the same heart. And then Dark Souls 2 Elden Ring is a reinvention while keeping some of the same principles, keeping things fresh. So what? Well, for you and me, my friend, I think we need to talk about reinventing ourselves. I think everyone's thought about it once or twice. They've looked in the mirror and thought, man, who is this guy? Is this who I want to be in 5 to 10 years? What is this, a business interview? But seriously, you've looked in the mirror and been like, I don't know, I could lose some weight, or I could be more productive, yada, yada, yada. Well, I think there's some key lessons that we can learn from this very successful game franchise. One is that you can reinvent yourself without changing everything. In fact, if you change everything, you're probably going to fail. But if you find out your core values, things that are really good about yourself, things that you don't want to change, well, that's a start. And then you can make little tweaks here and there for really positive benefits. I think there's also something to be said about the need for change. And that's clear through the themes of Dark Souls. In fact, I've talked about it in this video right here. For example, if we played Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, except they didn't change those movement things, they didn't update the gameplay to be faster and quicker, and it was just all on Dark Souls' 1 engine, it would have a much steeper fall off in terms of being boring. You wouldn't want to play the same game over and over again with nothing changing, or watch the same show season to season. You know what, I've seen it before. Well, guess what, we're all alive, we're all living life, we're probably in these routines. If you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you're going to get bored and you're going to get uninterested in your own life, which would absolutely suck. And I think that's where learning your core values, your deep down in your heart things that you can't change are important. And you can reinvent parts of your life that live on the outskirts that still line up with who you are. Just like how Dark Souls reinvented itself with every game, and then eventually reinvented the whole franchise with Elden Ring, although we can clearly see the through line between all of these games. And if you look at the plot, literally it is a dying kingdom, a dying era, trying to revive itself that we kind of need to just snuff out and let die and bring on change. That's like the whole point of Dark Souls. And then it became a game that was told 3 times through Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, and it was like kind of a story that needed to get snuffed out and let something new come in, like Elden Ring. So change is good, and we don't have to change completely. We can change marginally over time. All that being said, what else can I tell you? Well, sadly, change is on a bit of a spectrum. It depends on where you are in your development. I am in a class right now, and we've talked about leadership and how it's situational, and how depending on where someone is in their development should lead them a different way. And I feel like change within yourself is similar. I could tell you to do something, but maybe you're not there yet. Or I could tell you, hey, you need to start cleaning and making your bed, waking up early, and you're like, dude, I've been doing that forever. That's like way too basic of advice to give you. Change is something you got to do on your own. However, I will say that I think finding out your core values, what really drives you, asking why a lot about yourself, maybe creating a mission statement of your life, which sounds kind of silly, but doing all that kind of stuff is a good fundamental step, I'd say. And then also not being afraid of change. I think fear is a really big thing in life, but failure is invaluable. So keep pushing forward with that. And I think to have the most out of life, you should try to stay evolving. Just like how if you played Dark Souls 1 to Elden Ring, you can see, hey, this is the same game that I fell in love with, but it has evolved quite a bit. In a way, I feel like this video felt a little bit deeper than some of my other videos, but at the same time, I don't like that I don't have as solid of a conclusion for this one. However, no matter where you are on your journey, I hope that you enjoyed and would be willing to subscribe and check out this video, also on Dark Souls.